everyone. This is the Conscious Chicano. How's everybody doing today? How's it going? I'm on YouTube and Instagram. So I've been doing this lately, going on live at least an hour or so, um, talking about different topics. This is the Conscious Chicano. Um, if you're on my YouTube, click on the details below. I have a bunch of different links. One of them is my Rumble link. I have a Rumble channel as well. So you guys know, there's a lot of mainstream platforms censor, and there's certain things that I can't talk about. You know, so go to that Rumble link, and there's a lot of videos there, um, talking about a lot of deep stuff, exposing a lot of stuff out here. But out here on these commercial platforms, I gotta water it down. You know, you know how the algorithm is. You know, they pick up on certain words and right away they start censoring you or striking you and this and that, especially on YouTube out here. So check out my Rumble link below. And also, if you're on YouTube, you want to get a hold of me, send me a message. If you want to come on my video platform and discuss a certain topic, or if you want to invite me to your platform and we can talk about different conscious Chicano topics, um, add me on Instagram. I have I have an Instagram. I have a link down there on Instagram, so check them out. Actually have two of them, so you can get a hold of me there. Just send me a message, add me. So also I'm on Twitter. So a lot of us conscious people out here, went on Twitter because it's less censorship. So we don't get censored, on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. They censor me like crazy. I came out, started exposing a lot of stuff out here. You know, so I'm on these platforms right now as kind of like a funnel. So for you mainstream people, there's people that just all they do is just watch Facebook or TikTok and YouTube or Instagram, but they don't know that they can get deeper into the consciousness. And this is where you link up with people like me. You send me a message. I can even connect you with Telegram um, chat groups there, and we're just sharing lots of info, just dropping knowledge. And or just go to my Twitter and just read my feed, add me. There's tons of people on there just exposing a lot of stuff. Go to my Rumble account too. Tons of stuff there as well. So welcome, welcome. If you just came in, I'm doing this live on YouTube and Instagram. Hello, everyone. It's nice. Glad you showed up, especially over here on Instagram. This is the Conscious Chicano. So the topic today is actually it's Conscious Chat number 7, Critical Race Theory, CRT. I want to talk about this. Um, what's all the hype about it? Why all of a sudden, everyone's making a big fuss of it. Um, so a lot of early on in my activism, and say in the 90s, when my consciousness was, I was pretty much becoming more conscious, of a lot of things out here. um, you know I started reading about colonialism, um, systemic, like systems of oppression, um, white supremacy, a lot of things like that. And one of the books that actually woke me up, and I don't like using that word woke too much because I'm going to get into that whole topic. This, um, a lot of this fake wokeness out here. I'm old school, so I used to promote a lot of consciousness, and the consciousness is not of a particular political party pushing a certain agenda. We're conscious to, and we're aware of different sides of oppression out here, manipulation, deception, and all that stuff. So um, a lot of this fake wokeness out here is pushing the democratic agenda, the liberal agenda, and for us conscious heads, we point out that this is fake. It's not it's like it's a watered down, superficial wannabe consciousness, but it's not because you're pushing a certain agenda that's oppressing certain people. And so we'll get into that. But how did I? So this whole critical race theory, right? Let me tell you. So it's became a big old thing, and right now you hear a lot of Democrats pushing that, right? And then now you have resistance towards that, which is a lot of the Republicans, okay? And I pretty much observed both sides, both perspectives, and none of the perspectives are really from a Chicano perspective. So, and the way I am is I like to give a Chicano perspective, a brown perspective on this whole thing, because a lot of times we hear um, different. Usually, on a Democratic agenda, you either hear certain ethnicities like talking about it all the time, like you'll get you'll get white people trying to push this whole critical race theory, and they have their twist to it. And then you have black people as well, you know and it's like we never hear about the brown perspective on this whole thing, right? Hardly. And then you got the Republicans, the conservatives over here with their perspective is usually a white perspective, or you'll have a black perspective. Um, there's kind of like the black conservative perspective on race and critical race theory and stuff like that. So we have these two perspectives dominating the whole CRT, critical race theory perspective. And I actually go deeper than all of those guys, and from a brown native perspective as well. So if you guys know, I promote Chicanismo and Indigenismo as well. Us brown people have indigenous ancestry, blood, history, and we have to present our perspective from a decolonized perspective in some sense, critiquing a lot of the Eurocentric structures out here, the Western structures that have imposed itself on us ever since colonialism. So, a real good book I suggest reading is getting your hands on a book called American Holocaust by David E. Stannard. That book actually made me aware of history, a lot of history, and how white supremacy, systemic white supremacy, was implanted in the Americas. If you when you're talking about critical race theory or systems of oppression, white supremacy, if you're a brown or native person, you better go all the way back to colonialism, because a lot of that started ever since the colonization of the Americas. And we can even go into Mexico, how white supremacy was implanted there, systemic white supremacy. And a lot of us history buffs, especially of Chicanos and Mexicans, we read a thing called the casta system, that the Spaniards brought. It's the caste system, right? You heard about the caste system in India and stuff like that, If you guys never heard of the caste system in India, some say that there's the original indigenous people of India were colonized, right, by I guess the Aryans, right, and the Aryans were um, not the in my perspective were not the people that look blonde hair and blue eyed, right, but they would say they were actually possibly lighter skinned than say the indigenous that were already there in India. So when they went over there and colonized India, they set up a caste system there, and where the darker indigenous person was at the bottom, and they set up a caste system where the Aryan was at the top, right? And they say the caste system still exists in India, right? And the same thing occurred in the Americas. In the Americas, when the Europeans came to the Americas, right? They set up a caste system. We have a caste system even right now in the United States. If you look at the economic situation out here, most people who are wealthy, who have all the land and resources, are usually of European descent. And I know this is a fact because out here in Los Angeles, I used to drive a lot right here in this Beverly Hills, and Beverly Hills is known where all the rich people live, right? And you have mostly people of European descent who are the rich, and you go to the poor communities. Poor communities are usually black and brown, right? Mostly brown, because out here in Los Angeles, there's more brown people out here who are poor. And so we see this inequality, this structure here that's existing. Most of the people graduating from Ivy Leagues, you know, are of European descent. You might have some exceptions. I'm not talking about exceptions. I'm talking about the majority. Okay, so a lot of times, white people will use Asians as the model minority, right? They'll say, "Oh, why can't you Mexicans? Why can't you black and brown people be like Asians, right?" and and because there's Asians that that are coming out of the UC system. They're graduating from there. A lot of them, they're going to Ivy Leagues and stuff like that. This tech universities and everything. But we got to understand the context before we start using Asians as the model minority. So first of all, when Europeans came to the Americas, who did they encounter? They encountered the native brown people, right? That's who they encountered. And then they basically colonized them. They took their land, they enslaved them, they committed genocide. They took all their resources and wealth, right? And even, they built their system. They implanted their system there. They implanted their institutions, right? Their economic system there. Um, and so once they did that, they found a way through their system and their institutions to basically to profit from that system, right? To profit from it and maximize that profit as much as possible. Even they set up a whole economic system that discriminated against other people, especially indigenous, especially African people and stuff like that. So basically, the conquered people they set up a system where the conquered people were not to climb up the ranks so easily or have certain privileges, right? And we know this in history that when certain rights and privileges were presented, it was usually white males or even white male owners, right, of land. Even some of the poor whites that came over here weren't as privileged as say the white males who had more resources than. So even amongst white people and Europeans, there's even a form of what they call classism, you know. So you had, you know, when the Europeans came to the Americas, you had those who were wealthy, had a lot of power, right? And then you had also kind of like servants or people who were in debt, you know. They weren't slaves, but although some contend that they may have been slaves at times, and yeah, that slavery did exist in Europe, and even some of the Europeans enslaved each other, right? So that's a reality. But when they brought this that system over here to the Americas, they saw that, oh shoot, we can enslave all these natives, you know, and control and use them, you know, control them and use them for labor to profit from, and they did that. And then when they, you know, they killed a lot of our natives off, and they needed more slaves, and they needed somebody to replace them, so they went to Africa and started using them as well. And they set up this whole system. They set up a whole economic system, political system. They set up their institutions, their universities, their banks. You know, they set up you know, a lot of things from stolen land and resources, their media, you know, the whole system of even in a way to function, you know, in the that this like to function, you know, with just acquiring or, you know, certain resources, you know, so they had control of the resources, you know. That's the first thing they did when they colonized, you know. They took the land. They started going after all the, you know, elements, and commodifying them, making money off of them, and that's what they did, you know. And they set up their system, and it's basically a system where, you know, it's kind of like a pyramid, you know. They're at the top, and everybody else is like below them, right? And this is the caste system of history, you know, especially when the Europeans colonized all the Americas. You got from all the way from Canada to tip of Latin America. You have a caste system where Europeans were at the top. This is history. And if you guys don't want to believe me, there's plenty of books that talk about this. So go get your hands on a book called American Holocaust by David E. Stannard, and you're gonna see a lot of this, what I call the white supremacist matrix, being established in the Americas. You know, it just goes all the way back to colonialism, all the way to modern times out here. So it's not a lot of times white people will say, "Oh, you know, I didn't do slavery. My ancestors, you know, may have, but why should I be accountable for, you know, the white supremacy or anything that my ancestors established?" That's one of their twists to this. And but then you can reply to them and say, well, you know, you benefited from your ancestors. You benefited from the genocide, the slavery, the land theft, you know. You have the real estate, right? You have a lot of you inherit the wealth. A lot of them inherited the wealth. I remember I was out traveling in the Southwest, and they were doing a tour, right? And there was a whole lot of land, and people were asking, "Oh, who owns all this land?" And then basically the white guy says, "Well, it started a long time ago, you know, when the Europeans were coming from, you know, from the east to the west coast, and there was a family that basically you know acquired the land, you know, from the natives, and from there on it's like you know, kind of like stole the land, basically took the land. That's what he was saying. And they, you know, they inherited that let all that land, and they pass that land from family to family, right? And land is very important. I came to realize that land is wealth. That's what it is. You could do so much with land, and the Europeans knew about that. As I explored the whole real estate industry and all that, people become rich off of real estate. Imagine all the land grabbing that the Europeans did, and how wealthy they got, off that land. So, and we wonder why it's like a lot of, what you call the government out here owns most of the land, right? Even when you purchase land, it's like you still have to give, you still got to answer to the government, right? In some sense, you got to pay property taxes and stuff like that. You still got to answer to them. Um, so land is very important, and from because of this, there has even been even amongst Chicanos, brown people, a whole land back movements. They want their land back, right? The natives want their land back. So definitely, yeah. So there's a whole land back movement, and um, yeah. If anybody has came in, I'm on YouTube. Um, welcome. I'm on YouTube and Instagram. So welcome everyone. So the whole land back movement is, a lot of Chicanos and Chicanas are, you hear this in their rhetoric, they want the land back, right? Because they're aware that a lot of this land here belongs, well, actually, all of it belongs to natives here. And so that's the source there. And so white people, European people have become rich off of these lands, wealthy off of these lands. Now, some of the white people, European people will say, "Well, what do you mean?" They'll go, I'm not rich. I was poor and this and that. So it's not racism, right? You got to be aware of white people's rhetoric a lot of times. They use all these excuses to justify themselves or try to relinquish themselves from being held accountable to historic white supremacy or even current systemic white supremacy. So they'll come out with some exceptions to make you believe it's not about racism at all, or it's not about systemic white supremacy and racism, not whatsoever. And then you got some of these guys who are into Marxism, and I'm very critical of Marxists. They say, oh, it's not about race, it's all about class and economics. I remember I got in a debate with a white professor one time, a sociology professor one time, and and he didn't like the fact that he was trying to blame everything on classism. He was a Marxist too, and I was telling him, man, it's not just class. It's racism, right? And but then he started throwing at me, well, there's poor white people too who are discriminated against and this and that. And then I said, well, you know, I didn't want to respond to him because I knew he had the power to give me a bad grade. So I'm aware of the politics in these institutions. And this is white supremacy. The educational system is a white supremacist system. So even as me as a conscious brown person, if I came out and countered that professor, and he would use his power to actually give me a lower grade than what I actually deserve, right? Even though I work hard or I ace everything, they'll still have their biases and they'll probably give you a lower grade, right, than what you actually deserve. And this kind of stuff happens all the time. Nobody questions it, right? You know, and you wonder why a lot of white people are having better GPAs and having more access to Ivy Leagues than, say, a lot of these brown folks out here, you know. So there is a white privilege going on here, you know. And you talk about white privilege, and a lot of Europeans or white people will say, no, no, I don't have white privilege. You know, look at me. I didn't grow up rich and this and that. No, even within, say, within the system of white supremacy, you still have a more of an advantage if you're European, if you're white, to climb up the ranks of the social ladder. You have more advantages. You know, just by the fact that you're white. You know, a lot of times when getting hired and stuff like that, a lot of times, you know, companies, government, institutions will hire you. You know, I heard of many cases. Like I had a friend who works in the corporate world, you know, and he's from Ecuador, and he told me, man, and he was the type, he was conservative too, and he was the type that he was kind of like in denial of racism, right? And usually Republicans and conservatives are in denial of racism, but he admitted to me and said that he said that, yeah, you know what, in where I work, because he worked in a big corporation, I see a lot of white people don't even have degrees, or are not even that educated. And he goes, I worked my butt off to get a degree and all this experience, and like they don't even let me you know uh, move up the ranks hardly. But as soon as this white person comes and he sees a bunch of them, right? They right away get hired to higher positions and better pay, you know, and they're not even as experienced as him, and he's not even old either. You know, he at that time he wasn't even old. So, and he had more qualifications, but because of that, he says, yeah, you know what? I'm seeing this even right here at my job, and I see it a lot, you know. So it happens, and he even admitted, you know what? So us brown folks out here, like we have to work twice as hard just to even get to their place in some sense. So that just shows you the systemic inequality and the white privilege that exists. Even if you're a poor white person or a regular working class white person, you do have white privilege. You could climb up the ranks faster than say a brown folks out here. Um, and there's actually a good book called Settlers. If you ever get a chance, I forgot the author's name, but it's a little book, and you can actually go on and Google it. And Google is like a free. I think the online version is a free one. It's called Settlers, and um, and the guy is pretty good. He does an analysis. He even critiques even Marxism, and he debunks the whole thing that, oh, it's all only about class and never about racism. And he even debunks the whole thing that you know the that white people are also at the bottom. You know, he says that white European colonizers have never been the permanent underclass. The permanent underclass has always been the colonized, you know, brown native people, African people, African, um, and we've, people of color. I even using that term, people of color. Sometimes it's political, but I like to use it kind of to generalize, brown and oppressed people, especially black and brown. But brown people and black people have always been native people, native people, Mexicans and all. Most of us out here in the colonized world have been the permanent underclass. We've been the ones at usually the poor, the working class, building, building their empire, the colonizers' empire, right? The colonizers' wealth, right? the Marxists like to call it capitalism, right? But I think it's more than just capitalism because, um, you know, it involves what you call racism, systemic racism, you know. And a lot of times people think racism is, oh, it's just prejudice, right? Or just, oh, you hate a certain people, right? And racism does involve that. So, but there's different levels to it. There's a type of racism that's more personal, right? More like, okay, I hate you, right? Because you're of a certain characteristic, certain ethnicity, right? Or I hate those people, right? Because of they're a certain culture, certain ethnicity, right? Okay, and then there's a type that's more like personal, right? Personal biases, right? But then there's systemic racism, where you have a system, right? A system that discriminates against certain people, right? Even though it claims it's all about equality, right? We know a lot of the hiring practices, a lot of times it's very discriminatory, although they hide behind their so called laws and policies and some baloney. But yeah, they have a system where it caters to European descendants from the beginning, so they had an advantage ever since they created these systems, right? And of course, it's just natural that they created a system for themselves, and they profit from it, right? Whereas everybody else, remains under them and they don't profit as much, right? Now, white people will say, well, what about some of the successful black people, right? Or successful brown people, right? Or you'll come out with some black person, oh, look at, I made it. I pulled myself from my bootstraps, or look at me, I succeeded. Why can't you, right? Whereas, you have like one black guy who succeeded, whereas the majority of the black people haven't, right? you know Same with a brown person. You'll get some brown person say, look at, I succeeded, I did this and that, and look at me. And then you have the majority of the brown people who are struggling, who trying to make ends meet and living in poverty, or just working class and all, not really wealthy, right? So we have this kind of thing going on, and it's a facade, it's an illusion, right? A lot of times they say we actually, the system allows certain people, like from poor communities, some people to access certain status and wealth, to make it look like, oh, look, we're not racist, right? We allowed you to get wealth and succeed, so we're not, it's not a racist system, right? And it's just a lie, it's a facade, right? And we all know that most of the people who have all the wealth are of European descent, especially in the Americas. You go to Canada, you go to the United States, you go to Mexico, you go to Central America, South America. Most of the people with all the power and wealth are of European descent. I know years ago I went to Mexico, over there to the Mexico City, right? And I was just exploring all the different places there, and then you kind of see where all the poor people are at, right? It's usually brown native people, right? And then you go to the more affluent neighborhoods where the wealthy people live, and it's usually not brown people. It's like gated communities, like it's really nice and everything, and it's usually foreigners or European descendants, just different, non-indigenous people, and I see that, you know, and it's. I feel like sometimes I'm in that, like that movie, Rowdy Piper. They Live, right? You put on your critical race theory glasses, right, and you see all the systemic racism that occurs, right? You see it, and you see it like it exists, right? I mean, over there in Mexico City, I saw. Europeans who had indigenous maids, and the indigenous maid is just over there following them around everywhere, you know. And I see the inequality going on there. Not only Mexico City, but I see it in Beverly Hills too. Just drive around there. Sometimes you see a lot of these indigenous maids around, you know, and it's like, okay, it just shows you the inequality. You have Europeans who are rich, and you have basically their brown little slaves. That's what it is. And it hasn't changed ever since colonialism. Although now there's probably little, they have more rights in some sense, but not as much. Not in terms of finances and economics, but back then, indigenous slaves were not paid, right? Now it's like, okay, we'll pay you a little bit. We'll pay you a little bit, but just to make it seem like we're not racist anymore, right? So they'll give you crumbs to make you believe that it's not racism doesn't exist anymore, that this is not a racist system, right? Or we'll let a little Uncle Tom or sellout or whatever climb up the ranks, right? And say, look, oh, look, we'll point to him. He's successful. Why can't you be like that, right? Or we'll point at the model minority, right? We'll point at the Asians and say, hey, look, why can't you be like them, right? Why can't you brown and black people be like them? So, and we got to even understand that history too. So history matters in understanding what is actually going on with certain people and their political economic status. And so, like I said, go read that book, American Holocaust. It talks about all our brown native history there. And when you have European colonizers coming, say we have the Americas here, right? And then you have these Europeans coming in, and then they invade the lands, they commit genocide, they take over all the resources, they enslave people, make people subservient. That you have to understand that history, and history has a causal relation. There's a cause and effect relationship even in history. So if you do not understand that, you're not going to understand the dynamics on why brown people are not as wealthy as, say, the European colonizers, right? There's a cause and effect with history, okay? And so you're gonna see you have to understand that. So if, say, the situation changed around, right, and you had European colonizers who went to China, right, and they tried like the British tried to invade China and take over it, but the Chinese were aware of their manipulation tactics, and they kicked the British out. But the British, I guess, took over Hong Kong at one time. But the Chinese were uh, very well aware of the tactics of the European, and they booted him out. They saw like the British were trying to use the opium to drug up the Asians, right? To get them addicted, to weaken their nation, to take over it eventually. And so the Chinese saw that, and they stopped that, and they kicked the British out, right? And because of that, they were not conquered, they were not colonized, and they remained really strong. Although I don't agree with their government now. Yeah, and that's a whole different topic. But you can admit historically the Chinese have protected. They became very strong. They didn't get colonized by the British. So that's important to know, and that matters. Now, if say that they did get conquered by the British, they would be experiencing the same thing as brown folks over here. You know, if the British took over China, right, there would have been mass genocide, slavery, land theft. The Europeans would be wealthy off of Chinese land, right? and the Chinese would be struggling just like us natives here or brown people, right? Facing institutional systemic racism, discrimination, and you're gonna have, oh, you they would have had Europeans who were hoarding all the wealth, right? Pretty much, the same thing. So there wouldn't be any stereotype of Asians being smart, as being, successful. They wouldn't be the model minority if history would have resulted in the British taking over China. The same thing with say Japan, right? And they tried, right? They nuked Japan and everything, but somehow they, I guess they didn't take over the whole country, right, and colonize them. So, but Japan got smart, and they made a comeback, right? They started learning the technology and all that. Even though technology has its drawbacks and everything, like especially there's pros and cons to technology, right? It could be disastrous for the well-being of the earth, right? But then sometimes technology can help in terms of convenience, self-defense, and different things like that. So there's pros and cons in that. But if the Europeans would have taken over Japan, Japan wouldn't have been the model minority. They wouldn't have, none of this would be occurring with them. They would be struggling just like us, right? Us native people under their system of their colonial power, right? So let's see here. But there's something interesting though, and I know the Filipinos are not Asian. I mean, some of them say they're Asian. Some of them say they're what is it? I guess a Pacific Islanders or something like that. I forgot how they label themselves, but there's Filipinos are, sometimes they say they're Asian, sometimes they say they're something else. So, but I'm trying to. I mean, usually they're all, they're with the whole Pacific Islanders at times, or Asians somewhere. I think it's what AIPAC or something like that. There's certain term that they use to kind of identify with that. But I'm just using them as an example of history too. So the Filipinos, a lot of them been through a lot with like exactly how Mexicans, like what they've been through. They've been colonized, first by the Spaniards, you know, and then later by other people, including the United States. And and for example, usually when we hear the model minority, right? Or why can't you brown and black people be like the model minority, right? And usually they're pointing towards, say, like Koreans or Japanese or Chinese, right? But it's not like towards. Usually, it's not Filipinos, right? It's like people don't really think of that, right? Filipinos don't have like a stereotype of being like high tech and really smart and this and that. Sometimes they joke around and say, "Oh yeah, we're kind of like the was it the we're kind of I forgot what it was the Mexicans of Asia or something something like that." I heard some of them saying that, but I know it's not Asia, but of Asians. I mean, yeah, the Mexicans of Asians. So some of them admit, yeah, it's like they have they're not as, I guess, advanced as say the Japanese and Chinese and Koreans. So but you got to understand their history though, and how they were enslaved, and there's genocide that occurred, and they're put into poverty under certain systems and stuff like that. So that's why they don't really have that stereotype as other Asians out here, and and so we got to understand history, right? We got to understand that stuff. History is very important to understand the whole economic situation, the status of a people, and everything. And this is very important, and you got to understand the history of systems and how they were implanted from colonialism. And so you can't just randomly pick people and say, oh, why can't you be like that person or those people and all that. You got to understand the historic situation that occurred. And this understanding awareness is like, okay, now we see what's going on here. And yeah, just you know but I my way, I got into this whole systemic racism before. I guess critical race theory has been around for a while, but there's actually been something that predates the whole critical race theory, and it's a lot of there's been people that have been talking about this, especially the Black conscious community. I've learned a lot from a guy named Neely Fuller Jr., and he's been teaching about systemic white supremacy, I think all the way back to the 50s or even before that or something like that. And I was introduced to it. I used to actually listen to some of the black documentaries, especially the whole thing on Malcolm X and talking about white supremacy and everything. Malcolm X, man, he was very well aware of white supremacy and how it affected black people and people of color. And it's very relevant for natives and Chicanos out here. But but I actually bumped into Neely Fuller through some of these documentaries, getting involved in the whole Black conscious movement and everything. And sometimes I would visit some of their bookstores, and I would come across books on, white supremacy and different things out here, exposing things. Really, I would visit some of them in Inglewood and down over there. And one of them actually closed down. I used to talk to the owner, and he told me that he used to be a Black Panther back in the day, and he was telling me that you definitely need to read Neely Fuller Jr. And I was like, oh wow. And he showed me this book called The Code, and basically he was like explaining to me, it's like, yeah, you got to read that, because everything else, you're just gonna be confused and distracted and everything, but just read this Code book right here. So I went and bought that book, and I started reading it, and I'm like, oh wow, this is some good stuff right here. Like, and he's kind of like breaking it down, kind of like logically. He's using logic, with his arguments and everything. And he's just talking about the system of white supremacy, how it functions, and how it functions in all people activity. And he goes into the different categories. I think it's like politics, war, sex, religion, economics. Um, he goes through some categories, and I was thinking, oh, there should be more categories, like the media, Oh, he talks about the educational system as well. Um, it's so much that the system of white supremacy and how it affects the mindset, especially affects the mindset as well as the economic, and it's just a whole systemic um, toxicity basically, or it's a whole system that tries to subjugate people of color, people who don't identify as white supremacists. And then he goes into the whole thing on how white people react when they're exposed as white supremacists. And he goes into all the technicalities. So Neely Fuller Jr. is like, to me, he goes deeper than a lot of the what the critical race theorists talk about. Critical race theory is it's okay. A lot of it was started by lawyers, right? One of them being a Chicano. I think his name is Richard Delgado, and he even has a book on the intro to critical race theory. You know, and the only problem I have with a lot of the critical race theory movement is they usually start pushing this non-binarism, this feminism and stuff like that, because they're influenced by the democratics left, right? And so, and my thing is like, I have an issue with that, because there's not a lot of there's a lot of deception and lies coming from those aspects. But critical race theory is good overall. I just don't agree with the whole feminist and binary stuff, right? Non-binary stuff. Um, so, but they make some good points. They mainly focus on like institutions, and which is pretty good. The institutions to and they it's very similar to what Neely Fuller Jr. talks about. But Neely Fuller Jr. goes kind of further and talks about how it's global white supremacy, you know. And like me, I put it all together and I connect it to colonization. So it even gets deeper with me. History, colonization, you know, I call it the matrix of white supremacy, right? You know. But so we have the left and the right on their perspectives of critical race theory. Okay, so when we had this whole Biden agenda, right, we saw all these fake woke people coming out and saying everything's racist, right? And they kind of manipulated people to get all hostile and all crazy, right? And then they started pushing for Biden's corrupt politics, right? And this is part of the problem right here. And I guess the Republicans caught on to that, right? Especially with some of the hypocrisy of the whole Black Lives Matter stuff. There was some controversy of some of them taking off with the money and buying mansions and catering to the non-binary stuff and not really helping black people. So it's stuff like that. It's like it's misusing a lot of the it's what I like to actually say. You have to make a distinction between real racism and white supremacy versus you know when people use racism and white supremacy that's is kind of manipulative and deceptive, and how it's not completely true. And so you got to make that distinction there. So, or they use it just to, make a profit off of the people, right? Pimping the cause, right? Culture vultures. I don't agree with that. And because of this, the Republicans come out and say, "Oh, no, 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 racism doesn't exist. Look at you guys. You're just using racism as an excuse to make profit off the black community. You're not helping them." And so we got one extreme, the Democratic lefts. They're misusing the whole, the rhetoric of calling out the white supremacists for certain agendas, especially the whole Biden agenda, the corrupt Biden agendas, and and then you got the Republicans, and I have beef with them too, you know, um, and they're base. The source is a lot of white people are always in denial of racism, and they come out as even saying, "Oh, I don't have white guilt," you know, and so they're all proud, like, some of them are white supremacists, right? But white supremacists exist even amongst the white liberals too and Democrats too. So I don't like to say that white supremacists only exist in the Republican Party. They also exist in the Democratic Party as well. And actually, the whole Democratic Party started by white supremacists, and they say the Republicans, it did involve some white supremacists, but also some abolitionists as well. Some people argue that abolitionists started the Republican Party, but we know that Abraham Lincoln was still a white supremacist. He claimed that he wanted to free the slaves, right? But he was all about his agenda. He wanted whites and blacks to, um, you know, he wanted whites to have a separate privilege um, life than, say, the African slaves, or former African slaves. So, and then Abraham Lincoln hung a lot of natives too and committed one of the biggest lynchings around. So he was still racist. So, and a lot of these founding fathers were racist, right? They owned slaves. They saw natives as, oh, you guys are not even human, and oh, we're gonna take your land, and you're, beast of burden and this and that. So the founding of this whole country was built on racism. And sometimes we got these patriots, white patriots, or even Christian patriots. I'm a Christian, but I'm a decolonial brown Christian. But I call out even these white supremacist Christians. How they try to say, "Oh, no, no, this system was not built on genocide and slavery and white supremacy." There's people that deny that. There's people like that. These white patriots are like that too. But we have these Republicans out here who deny racism even exists. And their argument is this, is that, oh, since there's no such thing as race, all right, there's no such thing as race, therefore racism doesn't exist. That's their they like to throw little monkey wrenches at you to confuse you, right? To make you believe racism doesn't exist. Now, you could counter that and say, well, race is a social construct, right? But the reality of racism has historically and presently, it does exist. And what we mean about that is when you come and colonize a people, especially the Europeans colonizing the Americas, you know, and the Europeans committing genocide, slavery, and taking people's land. That's historic racism. That's systemic racism too. You set up the institutions, your institutions that discriminate against those you conquered, right? And you benefit from all the wealth and all that, from the stolen resources. And it continues to this very day. This is understanding racism not only historically but even presently. And when you talk about that, it's like you have to you have to tell them, hey, it does exist, you know, and you give them a lot of examples of that. Like I just mentioned, just talk about all the inequalities that has existed from colonialism, the whole caste system, right? The inequalities of people who are wealthy versus poor, right? You know, I'll mention the social conditions of brown folks, right? Look at the prison population, right? You know, uh, so, but they'll try to throw a monkey wrench at you and give you some exceptions, right? And like I said, like that book says in Settlers, white people have never been the permanent underclass. Some of them may have been poor here and there, but they never became the permanent underclass. They always found a way to climb up the ranks in their own system. whereas the permanent underclass, working class has always been brown, people of color, all that. Uh, so we gotta challenge their whole thing, and then Republicans will come out with this whole affirmative action thing. I heard their rhetoric, right? And they'll use they'll throw a monkey wrench at you and say, okay, um, some might, person of color who had wealth, right? Who comes from a wealthy family, he gets in, say, an Ivy League, right? Whereas a poor white person gets rejected, and they kind of have the same grades or GPA, right? And or maybe the rich person of color or well-to-do person of color doesn't have as a high of a GPA than say the the poor white person or working class white person, right? And so a white person will file a lawsuit and say, "Oh, you guys discriminated against me," right? And so because of this, they got rid of affirmative action in certain places, right? And they say, okay, we can't discriminate against, using race as the as the policy. We got to go by economic situation. And so my thing is this, though: white people, Europeans have always had affirmative action ever since. Just think about it. Ever since they took this land, ever since they benefited from the resources, they had privilege in their own system. And all these years, they've been discriminating against people of color financially, institutionally, and everything. People of color have always been, the permanent underclass, right? Lack of resources, lack of good education, access to good education, resources, and facilities, and um, different things that occur when in poor brown communities, native communities, black communities, and so we suffered for a long time, and we're still suffering, right? And now these white people want to say, oh, it's racism, when you want to reverse all that and give access, give people of color a chance to climb up the ranks in society, right? Oh, it's racist, right? In fact, your people have always had this natural affirmative action where you guys were, you know, getting accepted into these Ivy Leagues left and right. It still happens to this day. You hear of scandals of white students, their parents, get caught paying off the university, right? Or we have this whole privilege. Oh, if you graduated from this Ivy League, oh, it's easier for your kids to get in, right? And guess who's that? It's not brown people or native most of the time. It's usually people of European descent, white privilege, right? So we have this systemic racism going on, inequalities, right? So it exists, and we got to stop being in denial, right? But you'll be surprised. You got to study white people and their rhetoric and how they deny racism, systemic racism, and all that. They'll even try to turn your arguments into saying, "Oh, you think all white people were naturally born racist, right? You think all of them are racist." They'll use that kind of argumentation, right? Or they'll accuse. This is what they accuse the critical race theorist people of. Oh, you think all white people are evil and bad and racist? Or critical race theory comes from Marxism, right? I looked into all that. Let me just respond to that. Okay, so there might be some white folks out here who, like Neely Fuller Jr. says, that we cannot assume that no white person is a white supremacist. Basically, they have to prove it, through their actions, right? And in a sense, it's like, okay, you could talk like you're anti-racist, right? As a white person, you could, talk all this nonsense, right? You could even say, oh, you're revolutionary, you're for you're for the rights of brown and black people and all that. You can even join our groups, right? But action speaks louder than words. And here's the thing: I challenge even white, so-called anti-racist people. Some of you white liberals out here, um, if you're truly racist, uh, you'll do whatever it takes to eliminate systemic white supremacy and power. And one of the things that you can do is give your resources back to the indigenous people, back to the brown people, right? Because this is the land that they've been on for thousands and thousands of years. You could get, this is where the land back movement challenges a lot of these white liberals and including these white Republicans. um, if you're truly repentant and sorry for what is going on and what your ancestors did, you'll give up the wealth and power back to the brown people out here, the native people. And maybe you'll even go back to Europe, right? And but let's be realistic. You guys don't want to do that, right? You don't want to do that. It's too much for you to even like give up the resources and wealth, all that. Even some of you so-called, white revolutionaries out here. Just think about it. You're on this land. I was actually listening to a native elder. He basically challenged white people, even some of these so-called revolutionary ones, to think about the land that you're living on. Think about how you acquired your income, your wealth, all the resources you have on this land. All of it, all of this stuff was originally native land, all the resources. So you have to really think about it. Now, now, am I realistic? Like, do white people want to go back and do that? I doubt it. I doubt it. You know. So, and then so I like what Neely Fuller Jr. says. Until systemic white supremacy ends, then you can say that white people who Europeans, people who identify as white, you could say that their system of white supremacy has ended and they are no longer, uh, probable white supremacists, right? And even when a white person says they're not racist, right? You know, a lot of times they're thinking like a racist, right? They have certain behaviors and attitudes, right? I've seen so many white people married. They go and marry a person of color, especially a white man trying to go after the native, right, or the Asian woman, and just like in slavery times, the white man will go after the black woman, right? But now they're more craftier and trickier. They'll say, "Oh no, look at me! I'm not a racist. I married a woman of color, right?" But then we hear stories of a white man, abusing their wives and sometimes even doing criminality towards them, right? Or we hear of sometimes I hear white women that are married to men of color. Sometimes they're over there still like saying all their racist stuff, you know, against minorities, so-called minorities, right? I seen them. I seen it around, so just because a white person is married to a person of color doesn't mean that they ended white supremacy. Systemic white supremacy lives on, right? And actually, Neely Fuller Jr. even says that when a white person marries a brown, a person of color, it even confuses them too. It confuses the person of color to make them think that racism doesn't exist. It ended. um, there's also another issue. Like, for example, black people thought that racism ended when, say, a black president got elected, right? Or racism ended when the whole civil rights era, right? Now we have this whole issue. There was a sociologist. He was a Puerto Rican. I forgot his name. Um, just can't recall it right now. I think it's called Racism Without Races. He has several books on it. But he basically says that after the civil rights era, racism, like white supremacy, disguised itself as being colorblind. So we have this colorblind racism that exists, you know? And it's like, okay, now it's like, oh, we don't discriminate against anyone. We're not racist towards anybody. But then behind the scenes, you are, you know? Like I said, all these fake non-discriminatory policies and laws, yet they're over there hiring all these white people behind your back, right? Not even that qualified. And then people of color are like, okay, well, we don't want you here. You know, you don't have a certain look, right? You don't look like a white person. You're not. You don't talk like one. Stuff like that. It's a lot of things. But racism, white supremacy has become more craftier, more disguised, and even Neely Fuller Jr. talks about it. He says the white supremacists are very intelligent. People think that they're not, that they're dumb. They're just a bunch of dumb, uneducated racists. No, white supremacists are very intelligent. And they have deceived the colonized world, right, in their deception. And we have to be aware of that. They're very, very intelligent, you know, and this is how they have control, manipulation over the conquered people, the colonized people, right? They deceive them. And a lot of times it's through infiltration, deception, misinformation. They twist things around. They're deceptive. That's why even the native called the white man. He had a forked tongue, right? So he says certain things, but he doesn't really mean it, right? Or he twists the truth around, sneaks in deception with it, lies. Very similar to how the devil functions in the Bible. And I'm not saying white people are devils. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying the same demon. I call it like the white supremacist demon that has dominated colonized nations around the world. Um, it speaks a lot of half truths and mixes it with lies. So you got to be aware of that. Don't fall for the deception. So, yeah, so we have a problem that one side claims everything's racist and they misrepresent the real racism, white supremacy. And then you have the other side that denies racism even exists. And they'll point out to those other guys who always claim everything's racist, right? No. Now, when you understand the historic and current systemic system of white supremacy, you understand, like, okay, go read that book, American Holocaust. After that, you're gonna have those goggles, right? Like They Live, and you're gonna see things like the Matrix, right? That's why I call it the white supremacist matrix. That's what it is. Um, so you got to have that understanding. And a lot of people just think, oh, the only racists are the KKK or skinheads, right? you know. And actually, the most racist people that you can come across that have power and wealth are people. They're in, wearing ties, right? They're in power. They're in, you know. You just look at a lot of these imperials in charge of Congress, right? A lot of them are white supremacists. They're over here warmongering, taking over people of colors, their resources and lands, committing genocide and all that. The whole military industrial complex is white supremacist. It started ever since the European colonizers came to the Americas, right? And they used their military to conquer the whole, around the world, right? And the military is one of the enforcers of white supremacy. You know, even sometimes people of color get recruited to fight for white supremacist agendas, right? They've been doing it. That's where you get these Indian scouts. You got these Buffalo soldiers. You got some of these Mexicans. They fight for the military and go and colonize people. And then they come back to their country and face racism and discrimination. They don't have privilege as they promised, you know. There's even stories of immigrants joining the military, Mexican immigrants. They go and fight for this land and they come back and they get kicked out. That's a system of white supremacy. They just use you, right, for their white supremacy. And we have some of these Chicanos that just fall for it. We got all these white Chicanos that fight for, they 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 enforce or support the system of white supremacy. You know, that's even part of the problem too. Um, but yeah, definitely, if you ever get a chance, uh, you want to get deeper. Critical race theories, it's okay, but I just don't agree with the liberal politics behind critical race theory. But overall, critical race theory is pretty good as a tool to analyze the institutions, systemic racism, and white supremacy. It's pretty good in that analysis. But I would go deeper than critical race theory and check out like people like Neely Fuller Jr., his book called The Code, and he talks about the global system of white supremacy. I would go deeper and get a book called American Holocaust and see how systemic white supremacy was established in the Americas, So definitely, it's important to educate yourself with history too. History is very important to understand white supremacy. If you read about the colonizations of all these different lands by Europeans, read about the history of the Americas, other islands, um, a lot of even Africa too, and you'll understand systemic white supremacy, and it does exist, you know. And but we got too many people out here denying it. They deny any of that even exists, and uh, and a lot of the rhetoric's coming from European descendants, white people, and then they go and influence people of color. They go and how's it going? How's it going? Welcome, welcome, welcome to the chat. So, if you have any questions regarding this whole topic, for people who have came in, the topic is on critical race theory, systemic white supremacy. Uh, feel free to leave a question, and if you want to join me in the video discussion, um, say invite me and type it in. I'll send a link there. Um, and make sure you follow the chat rules. Stay on topic, keep it civil, respectful, and just contribute to the whole discussion. But thanks for coming in. Let me see. If you don't want to join on videos, fine. You could just send a question in the chat room. Um, oh, how's it going, brother? Definitely. I have a fellow brown, um, friend of mine. He's he's part of our underground Telegram group, and us a lot of us conscious heads is sharing knowledge and wisdom and everything. And definitely, he's definitely knows a lot of stuff too. Let's see. Let's see if he left the question. If you have any questions, man, like maybe some things that you're not, you know, maybe you see an issue or a problem or you're not too certain about. Let's see. But yeah, critical race theory, white supremacy. That's, I mean, there's so much to research on that. I've been reading a lot about that stuff, but I guess if you're into the decolonization, if you're a brown person, get that book American Holocaust. Get another book called The Code by Neely Fuller Jr. There's a whole bunch of other books, but I'm just just get those as kind of like as a begin start to start off. There's even one by Richard Delgado, The Intro to Critical Race Theory. That one's pretty, intro. Although I don't agree with all the feminism and the non-binary stuff, so he does have a liberal, democratic, agenda. I don't agree. See, as a conscious person, we're critical of both the right and the left, and in their politics, we don't limit ourselves to that. And definitely. Uh, okay, so I guess he Aslan Soul he asked a question. What is the overall point of critical race theory? Oh, okay. So the point of critical race theory is to basically expose the systems of white supremacy, especially embedded in the institutions like your educational system, your institutions of, that I guess give certain, um, status or access to certain social status, say like systems of, say for example, companies or jobs and all that, or your educational system, the government and all that stuff. It's a good tool to analyze, those institutions. It's good. It's not that bad. So a lot of people are against it, because of white people are always like coming off and saying, "Oh, there's no such thing as racism." Oh, you hate all white people, or or critical race theory comes from Marxism. Let me get into that. I actually forgot about that one. So, critical race theory is people who are anti-systemic white supremacy. Um, so okay, when the Republicans claim that CRT comes from Marxism, that's not necessarily true. They point out that it comes from the critical theory, right? But critical theory is not completely Marxist, right? And critical theory involves a lot of different types of thinking and thought. Marxism is one of them, but it's not fully Marxist. So there's critical race theorists that are not necessarily Marxists, they're not necessarily socialists and communists. And I think Neely Fuller Jr., he's kind of like that, where he's like, he sees racism, white supremacy, even in a communist country, a socialist country. Doesn't matter what government you have. Like in my perspective, as long as you have colonizers in control, I even go as far as the whole anarchist stuff, where as long as you have a colonial statist government, there's always going to be white supremacists right there in control, trying to, control everything there. Our thinking, our finances, our economics, all that stuff. So, to be a critical race theorist or someone who's anti-white supremacist, systemic white supremacy, some of them call them anti-racist. Although I think anti-racist label is kind of too Democrat, I don't really like using that term, but I say that you don't necessarily have to be a Marxist. As a matter of fact, I got in debates with Marxists, even other brown Marxist communists, and a lot of times they deny racism, even historic racism. So I debated a lot of them. I said, you need to you need to add racism and white supremacy to the whole element of understanding oppression. If you don't, add that, then you don't have a good understanding because you're just basing everything based on classism, you know. And it's not only about class. Economics is a factor, but you also got to include racism and white supremacy. So that's part of the issue, and I think I think it's a major issue, and that's why I like Neely Fuller Jr. because he's not a Marxist. So so critical race theory has its roots in different movements too. It's not just critical theory, and they say also from ethnic studies, from decolonial history, just a lot of different thought thinking out here, a lot of different intellectual influences. So you can't label all critical race theory as having Marxist origins, right? You know, you can't label every critical race theorist as a Marxist. So the Republicans are wrong about that because they want an excuse to for you to dismiss critical race theories. Oh, you're just a communist. That's what they label you as, if you start talking about systemic white supremacy. Oh, you're just a communist. And that's not true. That's not true, you know? So, and then the whole denial, what is it? Okay. They claim that okay, I already mentioned how the Republicans think that critical race theories, there's no such thing as race, so therefore there's no such thing as racism, or they think that you think all white people are racist, or you hate all white people. No, it's not. It's not hating, and it's not thinking that everybody is a racist, but it is acknowledging and saying, like Neely Fuller Jr. says, every white person, everyone who categorizes themselves as a white person, has the potential to be a white supremacist, and to prove yourself as not a white supremacist, you have to be taking actions to combat white supremacy. So we do have some historical figures who fought white supremacy, people like John Brown, some of the abolitionists, some of the European people who oppose native and African slavery. But here's the challenge to even the white revolutionaries, and it includes the whole land back movement. You challenge the white revolution and say, okay, if you're truly repentant of all what your ancestors did to the natives here, you'll give up your resources back to the natives, the brown people, and you'll go back to your land. But and you'll still keep fighting global white supremacy from Europe, right? But they do not realistically want to do that. So, and like Neely Fuller Jr. says that you cannot say white supremacy has ended until it has actually ended. Until if it hasn't ended, then you can't say that white people are not white supremacists. As long as it exists, you cannot say that white people are not white supremacists, right? So, but it's not hating white people. It's just being scientific. It's just being analytical. It's just doing historical observation, and seeing, hey, wait a minute, white supremacy does exist. And who brought it to the Americas? It's the colonizers, right? Now, who sustains it? Who's the one that gave birth to it? It's the colonizers. Now, there's times where brown and black people may build their empire, right? Since a lot of times as colonized, we were colonized to be subservient to be their slaves, right? And sometimes we even defend white supremacy. Like I said, the Indian scouts, the Buffalo Soldier, some of the Mexican soldiers who go and fight for imperialist white supremacy. And so that happens. But we got to admit that the root of white supremacy, systemic white supremacy, started with colonization. Start reading books like American Holocaust. Get a book called Settlers. That's another one. The Code by Neely Fuller Jr. So definitely. Let me go back to some of the comments by the brother here from Aslan Soul. Let's see. Stolen Continents since 1492. It's a badass book too similar to American Holocaust. Yeah, I have that book. I read it. I think his name is Ronald Wright. Yeah, that's a good book too. That's another book right there called Stolen Continents. That's a good book right there, man. Let's see here. No wonder they didn't want to teach in many places. Oh yeah, yeah. So you mentioned that. No wonder they didn't want to teach in many places. CRT. Yeah, the Republicans lately they've been anti-CRT, so they're going and they're they're going to different was it boards out here, board meetings, and they're protesting, and they'll use even a black guy, sometimes who's successful, right, and denies racism. He's the type that I was talking about. Some of the black conscious community called them Uncle Toms, right? The Mexicans call ours like tío tacos, right? Or the natives will say, oh, some apples, right? You always have these sellouts who will deny they'll succeed, right? And the system allows certain people to succeed, but not the majority, right? There'll be a few at the top, right, who get wealthy. And I'm not against getting wealthy, but I'm saying a lot of times these guys get indoctrinated and brainwashed by the white supremacists. And so they'll come out and say, oh, look at me, I'm successful, I'm rich, why can't you do it, right? In fact, the majority of brown and black people are struggling in poverty, and stuff. So they'll use, a person of color at these meetings and say, "Oh, we want to stop CRT from being taught in the school system and this and that," and this is a way for them to even they use the whole rhetoric. Oh, you're being racist towards white people, or you hate white people. You're teaching hate, or you're teaching Marxism, or whatever. They use all this white rhetoric to oppose CRT and even ethnic studies. And that means you can't teach Chicano studies, African American studies, Asian studies, none of that from K to 12 because it talks about their histories. And when you talk about the histories, you got to talk about white supremacy, systemic white supremacy. And this is what they don't want. They don't want, you know, the whole public to learn about their historical racism and white supremacy. They don't want even their own kids to even know about that history, because it's like, oh, okay. Now it's like, it might even spark change too, in the thinking out here. So the white supremacists are very crafty, and they'll use even our own people to oppose us. They've been doing that ever since colonization. They use other natives, other black people to oppose, the people who've been colonized, right? They use the whole divide and conquer tactic. So I'm not surprised when they do that. So you mentioned, where did CRT originate from? People of color or white European concepts? Well, CRT, like I said, has many origins, many influences. So, like I said, it does have its roots in critical theory, which is from Europe, but also you have it from ethnic studies too and histories. So it does involve people of color and their origins as well. So we've been talking about racism for a long time in our histories and our ethnic studies. We've been talking about systems of oppression and all that. So it's definitely influenced by us too. And one of the Chicanos involved in the CRT movement, one of the founding Chicanos is Richard Delgado, and he's a Chicano professor and lawyer as well. So he definitely is involved. Even Native history and all that, you know, Native history, from a Native perspective, they've been exposing white supremacy and colonialism for a while. So to say that CRT is strictly white origins or European thought is not accurate either. It's like trying to say that CRT comes from only Marxism, which is not accurate as well. So I think people of color should definitely look into CRT, learn from it, but go deeper. Go deeper. Start taking some ethnic studies, Native studies, Chicano studies, read American Holocaust, read that book, like you said, Stolen Continent by Ronald Wright. Get the book The Code by Neely Fuller Jr., another book called Settlers. Um, so, yeah, definitely. So, good point. Ronald Wright, majority ruling. Yeah. So, yeah, definitely. All the colonized nations have, the majority of wealthy people are usually European descent. As I mentioned earlier, you go through all the colonized countries around the world and usually have the Europeans who are at the top that are wealthy. Now, like I said, you might have some exceptions, but exceptions do not make the rule, right? What counts is who's the majority at the top hoarding all the wealth and power, right? So, and like I said, that book, Settlers, says white people have not been the permanent underclass. That means people of color have always been the permanent underclass. And even if you have a few poor white people here and there, they usually over time climb up the ranks in their own white supremacist system. So they're never really the permanent underclass in the Americas. It's usually brown, native, black, and people of color. So it's important to understand the racist element and not just the classism. Uh, so definitely, it's important to know that. But anyways, I guess I'm gonna head on out. I'm glad you showed up, Asla Soul. uh, Definitely join me in more chats, brother. And definitely. And for people who are watching here, go down to my description. And if you want to contact me, add me on Instagram. I have several Instagram accounts. So click on one of those links and send me a message, add me. If you want, some more information, resources, or you just want to get involved. Um, Also, you could go to my Rumble account, click on that right there, where there's, I have videos uncensored, right here on these platforms like YouTube and TikTok and Facebook. You got to be kind of like commercialized in some sense. You can't get too deep because they'll censor you. You can't talk about certain topics here. So this is kind of like a filter for you to actually go and click on those other links. Go to my Rumble account and just listen to all those videos. There's tons of videos there, just exposing a lot of stuff. And also click on my Twitter account below. And we're just sharing a lot of information. And whenever I see good information, I retweet, and sometimes I just tweet stuff there too. So there's a lot of us are not as being censored as much. So, but I have to kind of come on here to reach the masses. And especially the Chicanos, the brown people out here. you guys need to start, raising your consciousness. A lot of you have been deceived and manipulated, especially with a lot of propaganda out here. It's just crazy, and you're manipulated by the Republicans and the Democrats. It's time for brown consciousness to start, kind of, we need more brown consciousness out here, influencing, our perspective on different topics, and definitely. Anyways, well, you guys have a good day. Enjoy the day, and just remember, don't be woke, be conscious. This is the Conscious Chicano, and I'm out.